Welcome back to the Bro Show. We are here live with a double playoffs edition. We are live for the final four in the college football playoff, the first ever 12 team, now down to four. And of course, it is the first round of the NFL playoffs. Chad, what do you think is a more exciting playoff product, the NFL or college football?
You know me from the start. Whenever they made the selections for these 12 teams, I was on board. I felt like maybe one change that I think a lot of people are going to hope for next year is the initial seeding. Right, I wasn't super excited about these conference winners getting the first four seeds, which kind of blows it up. I'd like to see them actually go probably back to an AP ranking. That will make it more exciting for me. But honestly, it's been pretty exciting. Yeah, yes, we've had some blowouts, but that whole narrative of all these teams that shouldn't be in getting blown out, and then you turn around and Tennessee gets blown out, Oregon gets blown out. So I think it's absurd. I think that the college football at this point has the potential to be more exciting. But you know me, I'm an NFL guy. It's what I follow the most. I love NFL playoffs. Like, it is the best time of the year for all of sports, in my opinion. And so I'm going to stick with the NFL, and I think that the lineup for this year is going to be absolutely electric. I think we have a lot of really solid first round NFL playoff games that could go either way, and I'm pumped about it.
Of course, every year since I've been gambling, I attempted to go for the impossible, the undefeated NFL playoff against the spread streak. I'll go for it again this year. Nice 13-0. We'll see how likely that happens, but that's the goal, and hopefully once in my life I will truly go undefeated in every single NFL playoff game. But we're going to start off with the college football playoffs. We got two semifinal games. The first round matchups took place on home campuses. All four home teams won those games. All four home teams covered in those games. And the four teams that won the first round all won in the second round. All four teams with the bye ended up losing outright. Whether or not that is something that is an anomaly or will be a thing because of the rust versus rest type debate, I guess remains to be seen. But you have two teams now in Penn State and Notre Dame who have both won on campus and then beaten a team with the bye. Now, granted, they played a Boise State team who, as you said, probably didn't deserve to get the bye in the first place. And Notre Dame got to play Georgia, who was on their backup quarterback. Now, Georgia looked good with their backup quarterback, but Penn State, I still think that their strength of schedule thus far has not been the best, certainly in the playoffs. I think they've had by far the easiest route. Going against SMU, who was probably the worst of the 12 teams that got in, and then Boise State, which was the only group of five team that got in. Then you look in the regular season, their Big Ten play, they lost to Oregon, they lost to Ohio State, the two other teams that got into the playoffs. So I don't really feel like they have a win on the resume that would be as good as the Notre Dame win. And then you look at Notre Dame, and again, their resume isn't as strong either, but it feels like they've been playing a lot better and a lot stronger so far in this playoffs. They dominated Indiana. And Indiana, it turns out that Curtis Rourke was playing with a torn ACL and he had an injured thumb. But still, Indiana was a very impressive team all season. And they went out and beat Georgia, who, even though they were on their backup quarterback, again, this backup quarterback beat Texas in the SEC championship game, and he still threw for over 225 yards. It's not like he was the issue. So my early lean is Notre Dame. I think that they have a stronger path they've gone through right now, and iron kind of sharpens iron when it gets this late in the season. I also give them a coaching advantage. I really like their head coach in Marcus Freeman. And James Franklin, a lot of people like to say James Franklin has never won a big game. And honestly, I don't really know if I would consider SMU and Boise State big games. This is the first big game for James Franklin, and only given -1. Now the line is for Notre Dame. I think they get it done here. I'm riding Notre Dame and the Irish.
Okay. Early in the week, I was with you. I was leaning Notre Dame. I was trying to find just, why I liked Notre Dame. Maybe it was because of their performance, the turnovers that they had, playing a really solid Georgia team who typically is always up in these big games. Georgia, Kirby Smart. When you give Kirby Smart 2 weeks to prepare, coming from that Saban tree of coaching, you can typically count on him. But Notre Dame showed up and they played really well. They had some huge plays when they needed them. So I was really leaning them. And then was having a conversation earlier in the week. I got to give credit where it's due. C-Tweet Reese here, a buddy of mine who's been pretty sharp in NCAA. He mentioned he just thinks that Penn State is better in every position. And I was like, well, maybe he's being hyperbolic. But then I started to kind of look through things. And so I'm going to go through a couple things. First, I'm going to take a look at the coaching. Like you mentioned, James Franklin he's got that monkey on his back, right? You look at his record, he's 3-17 against top 10 teams as the head coach for the Lions, right? Not great. He hasn't had a big game that he's actually been involved in that they've gotten the win. So that's certainly a knock on Franklin. But then again, Marcus Freeman hasn't really done much since he became head coach in 21. Like, what big games have they won? They've won some big games, but obviously,
well, now they've beaten Georgia.
Sure, yeah. Now they've beaten Georgia. Both of these teams have won their respective games to get here, and that's fine. You can say Boise State wasn't a big game. You can say SMU wasn't a big game. But in the circumstance, these are big games because you're in the playoffs right now. We'll go back to the record against top 10 teams if we want to. But at this point, I'm going to give Franklin the nod here. I think he's going to get the monkey off of his back. I think he has the team to do it. And I also think that this past year, he's had a lot more that he's put on his assistants. Reading a little bit, hearing some interviews, and hearing how he's kind of handed off some of the responsibilities of the past into his new assistants that he's really leaned into this year. But moving on from that, I'm going to talk about defense. So both of these teams have solid defenses. Both of these teams are going to try and establish the run early in the game, which has been part of their identity in 2024. If you watch and see what they've done throughout the season. But I'm going to give Penn State the nod in rushing defense because they've allowed just over 100 yards per game, whereas Notre Dame's allowed 127 yards per game, almost 128 yards per game. Say what you will about Boise State's strength of schedule. Say what you will about Boise State and whether they should have been in the playoffs, but on that Boise State roster was the best running back of my lifetime, in my opinion, or at least since I've been watching football. Ashton Jeanty is by far the best running back that I've watched. There's a reason that he broke records. There's a reason that he was just shy of the all-time record. And there's a reason that he was number 2 in Heisman voting on a Boise State team with likely 0 NFL offensive lineman prospects on his team. They held him to 104 yards in that game, which was the lowest of the season. You say 100 yards. I mean, he still had 100 yards. This guy, I don't forget what his average was, but how many times did he rush over 200 yards? So I'm going to give them the nod on the offensive or the defensive side of the ball for running. Then I'm going to look at the quarterbacks. I trust Drew Allar over Riley Leonard when it comes down to big plays and big throws. I think he's had a better season passing the ball. He's had a better season in turning the ball over. Riley Leonard, yes, he uses his legs when he gets in trouble, but again, I'm going to go back to that defensive front and that defensive scheme and stopping the rush. So that's my lean there. Now we're going to look at running backs. I really feel like both these teams are pretty evenly matched. Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton for Penn State are 2 outstanding backs. They're in and out. You look at their the box scores from their games across the season. 1 week it's Allen, 1 week it's Singletary. Same thing with Notre Dame though, right? You got Jadarian Price, you got Jeremiah Love, which Cowboys draft Love, please. And both these teams just have outstanding running games. So I'm going to call this a draw for now. But then I'm going to kind of get into where I feel like the difference is going to be. Obviously, Penn State this year has Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren's the best tight end in college football. He was outstanding. And the question is, how is Notre Dame going to contain him in the game? And then you look at Notre Dame this season's number 2 in all of college football in man coverage percentages of plays. So they play man a ton. Over 50% of their defensive plays are in man coverage. So my thought is, as someone who doesn't know ball, is that these guys, they're going to line up and they're going to do what they've been doing all season that got them here, and they're going to line up in man. They're going to try and eliminate Warren, which I think is going to likely open up the backfield or open up Allen and Singleton out of the backfield. So I think that this is going to be one of those things where the scheme obviously is going to really matter, but I'm going to give Penn State the edge here. And then finally, I took a look at red zone. So if you watch Notre Dame this season, Notre Dame has not settled for field goals. And there's a good reason for that. Obviously, they've had some injuries in the kicking game. So they've had to go for it. And to be fair, last week they flipped that script a little bit on Georgia, going 3 for 3 with a 48-yard field goal. So I don't know that that's going to be the case this week. But if history repeats in this game as it has all season, we may see Notre Dame going for it in the red zone on 4th and short. And they just happen to be, facing the number one red zone defense in NCAA college football. So that's going to be a big key. I mean, even just one stop in the red zone, I think, is going to be maybe the difference in the game if they can get a turnover on downs. If Notre Dame continues to try and go for it in the red zone. So I'm going to be coaching the nod for Penn State. Quarterback play, tight end and scheme on defense, and red zone defense is going to give me the nod for my lean with Penn State.
I'm going to push back a little bit on the run defense aspect because I think Notre Dame, you're very underrating their run defense. They had to go against two of the premier running teams in the country. In fact, the two leading rush teams in the country, in Army and Navy, they held both those teams to only 14 points and scored like 40 plus on them. They held Army to only 3.5 yards a carry. Navy, if you take out the 160-yard quarterback touchdown run where, when you run 45 read option, triple option plays, one, I guess, and maybe make it 80 against Army as well. One is bound to scoop through. They had a very fine rush total that game. And last game against Georgia, where everyone knew they probably wanted to run the ball to take some of the edge off of Gunnar Stockton, they held him to less than 2.5 yards a carry. So Notre Dame run defense has been very, very, very strong, especially recently. And Penn State is missing their best overall defensive player, Abdul Carter. He got hurt in this last game. Franklin says he's a game time decision, but regardless, it doesn't sound like he's going to be 100% for this game. And as we saw in that Penn State Boise State game, once Carter left, Ginty was a lot more effective in the run game. So if he's out, I think that's a huge loss for Penn State. And I think that Notre Dame, because you said we know that Penn State does have that strong run defense, I think they're going to be able to throw the ball a little bit more than maybe you're giving them credit for. Leonard has been very strong at not turning the ball over, being a good game manager. And I could see the game script for Notre Dame being to try to use the pass early to kind of take the 7-8 man boxes away, and then they can pound the ball later, because Jeremiah Love might be a little bit banged up. He's gotten very limited carries over the last couple games. Rumors that he was sick in the first game against Indiana. Who knows? But I think they're going to have to, utilize Riley Leonard a lot, and he more than stepped up to the task against Georgia. So we're going against each other on this one. If you like Penn State or if you like Notre Dame, the best place to go to place your action is brothrow.com/YouTube. Use the promo code YouTube to sign up absolutely for free and take whatever side you want for the best odds available, plus 100 on every spread and over under, and the best money lines on the market. I dare you to find minus 110 Notre Dame anywhere else. Anyways, Chad, let's move on to the other college football playoff semifinal game. We got Ohio State taking on Texas. Ohio State has looked absolutely dominant so far this playoffs. Do you think this run continues?
I do, yeah. Simply put, I think Ohio State's the best team in this playoff. And this is going to be a little bit short of an analysis just because of, I think the matchup in the Penn State and Notre Dame game is much more intriguing to me. But, basically, we're going to go back to defense, right? We've heard all season about how Texas has one of the most elite defensive back groups in the nation. They're giving up the second fewest yards in the air all season. But guess who's number one? That's right. It's Ohio State. And I think that's, maybe those are going to be one of those factors that I still don't expect a low scoring game. I still expect that this can be a high scoring game. But, if we're talking about statistics, if we're talking about what these teams have done this season, you got to give Ohio State the nod there. And then, following up on that, on the same vein, between Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Ekbuga, Carnell Tate, and with Will Howard throwing the ball, I just don't see how this Texas secondary is going to stand a chance. I don't see how they're going to be able to keep up with these guys, all three, NFL caliber wide receivers. And to be fair, I think Texas also has some really solid weapons. Matthew Golden last week put up 150 yards against Arizona State. You've got Gunnar Helm and Isaiah Bond, who are also fantastic. And then a whole slew of other receivers who all have 400 plus yards on the season. So Quinn Ewers has been able to spread the ball out in this Sarkisian offense, but again, I think the matchup here favors Ohio State. Speaking of coaches, poor Ryan Day, right? All they've done is be pretty successful and then lose to Michigan every year. So I think that Ryan Day has to win a national championship to get that whole Michigan monkey off of his back. The fans are pissed. If you log into Ohio State Twitter after that game, my God, it was brutal, man. But I think that this is what's going to have to happen to get them over the hump. And like I said, I know the fans are pissed, But I think that Ryan Day is very motivated, and I certainly think that his players are right behind him, and they're motivated, and they're playing like a national championship team. Texas, I've felt like Texas was overrated this year. Arkansas played them close. They had a couple other really close games that they squeaked and edged out. Their defense has generally carried them. But Sarkisian's also a really fantastic offensive coordinator. And what it seems like is in the first couple series of each game, they score points. They drive easily and they score, and then it just kind of seems to slow down. So if they can't get ahead in the first couple of series, I really like Ohio State in this game.
You said about Ryan Day where, people, the fan base loves to crap on him. And it's funny because outside of Michigan, this guy has like basically been the best coach in the history of college football. Like his record in the playoffs,
his record is outstanding.
He's actually been really good. Like his first game against Georgia, where they lost by 1, is probably the best game he's coached in his career, even though they ended up losing that game because that Georgia team was an absolutely dominant national champion who would have been a contender for one of the best teams in the last decade. Last year, again, they went undefeated until losing to Michigan, missing the playoffs. 2 years ago, they lost to Oregon and Michigan. If they beat Michigan, they make the playoffs. They decided to go ahead and beat Utah in the Rose Bowl, where Smith and Jigba has like 350 yards receiving in one half. And then, so far this year, he's 2-0. So I feel like Ryan Day gets a lot of hate when he's not playing Michigan. And I feel like this Michigan loss has really galvanized this team. I wrote down when this matchup got announced, all my list of reasons why I think people would be on Texas and like what the arguments are going to be, because it felt like Ohio State is just going to be a very, very public pick here with how dominant they've looked. And with Texas, barely escaping against Arizona State with how they choked. And my main points were this game is taking place in the Cotton Bowl, which is in Texas. So it's basically kind of a home field advantage for Texas. But I think Ohio State's going to have plenty of fans traveling down to this game. I don't think it's going to be like an 80% Texas crowd, maybe 60, 65% Texas max, but there'll be enough Ohio State that it's not going to be like an overwhelming home environment. 2, as you said, was the secondary. Texas does have a great secondary. As you said, second in pass yards, I believe first in the country in interceptions. They also have the Jim Thorpe Award winner for the best defensive back in the country in Jahdae Barron. But I also agree with you. Like, even with the Thorpe Award winner, I would expect Jeremiah Smith to crush him. Jeremiah Smith has been crushing every defensive back going against him. This is a guy who, if he were eligible for the NFL draft right now, would be the number 1 pick, really without a doubt, even at 18 years old. He already has great size on him. He's a great route runner. He's just an absolute stud. I expect Ohio State to get him the ball and get him involved. And again, since the Michigan game, it felt like in that Michigan game, Ohio State was really trying to prove how tough we are, how physical we are. We're just going to beat you at the line of scrimmage and own you there. And like they didn't realize, or maybe they did, that Michigan's strength of the team is their line and their defensive line also. Since that game, Ohio State has been going with a much more air-heavy attack. They've been airing it out a lot more, throwing the ball over the field. I think they'll be able to do so as well. I think when they're playing at their best, as you said, no one can really stop them. Then you've got the Quinn Ewers revenge factor, right? Quinn Ewers initially was committed to Ohio State. He was on the team there. He couldn't break out of the third string and ends up transferring to Texas, even though he was, again, a very, very highly rated recruit. So I feel like you have all these reasons why you might want to take Texas, and it's still not really enough for me. I'm still riding with Ohio State in this game. I think that when they're playing at their best, no one's gonna be able to touch them. And the fact that this line opened up at like 4.5, got immediately bought up to 5.5, 6, and is still settled at 5.5, 6 shows me that maybe it's not as public heavy as we thought if it hasn't broached 7 yet. So I'm willing to take it here at 5.5. I'd be willing to take it at 6. We're both in agreement on Ohio State. We think that they roll here and advance to the national championship game. See how it goes.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Michigan, the team that Ohio State loses to over and over and over again, let's move on to the NFL portion of this video and talk about Michigan's former head coach, Jim Harbaugh, as he, in his first season with the Los Angeles Chargers, has led them to the playoffs, and they take part in the opening bout of the playoffs this season, taking on the Houston Texans, and the Chargers are a 3-point favorite on the road. Now, in the NFL, we know that home dogs in the regular season are kind of always a spot you want to look at, and especially so in the playoffs. Texans are missing a bunch of guys, don't get me wrong. They lost Tank Dell. They've had some other injuries, and they also haven't really looked as good over the last couple weeks to end the season. But I think this is a great buy low spot on them against a Chargers team who, again, I think that they're a good team, but it also feels like they've been very reliant on throwing the football with Justin Herbert. and not necessarily doing what Harbaugh wants to do, which is run the ball and play solid defense. Herbert is a great quarterback, don't get me wrong. McConkey has looked like a stud receiver coming out of the second round. But I think getting points at home with Texans, I think their defense is going to step way up in this game. They have a really strong coach in D'Amico Ryans, who I think he's going to get his defense ready to go in this spot. And getting the points at home when you have a quarterback as good as CJ Stroud, players in your team as strong as Mixon and Nico Collins, I just think it's a spot where I'm happy to take the points here because I can easily see the Chargers choking as this franchise has done historically over and over and over again. The Chargers might very well win, but I don't think it's by more than 3, so it's a push worst case scenario. Give me the Texans here in the first game of the playoffs.
Okay, I suppose it's my turn to kind of push back. I don't have this marked down as one that I'm actually going to play, but my lean's Chargers. Here's why. I think that the Chargers defense is being overlooked. I think the Chargers defense has been outstanding this year. I think they're still first in points allowed. They are generally healthy now. Obviously they got J.K. Dobbins back. They just signed Ezekiel Elliott to the practice squad. I'm sure that he'll travel with the team. Something they've kind of struggled with is some of their goal line scoring. And I think that, someone like Zeke, who, for the last 2 years, his job has been to get the ball inside the 5-yard line. So maybe that's something, if he makes it, that's going to help them out a little bit. I don't know. I mean, he's past his prime. He's washed, but, love you, Zeke, for always. But, Texans at home, like you said, the home field advantage is a huge deal, especially in the playoffs. I just don't think that C.J. Stroud, I wouldn't say that he had a slump this year, but compared to his, offensive rookie of the year season last year, it certainly has been a slump. They've, like you said, they're missing out on Tank Dell. Nico Collins is back; he's healthy. Joe Mixon has he's been revived this year on this offense. He was outstanding in the first half of the season, and then he's kind of disappeared a little bit. So I don't know what I attribute that to. Maybe some of the teams on film have started to catch up to this scheme. But if I'm going to lean here, I'm going to put my money on Harbaugh and the Chargers. I just like their defense better, and I think that they've been playing really good. Like you mentioned, Ladd McConkey has been outstanding, like an incredible receiver for this team. Justin Herbert is one of the most talented quarterbacks in the NFL. I'd like to see him get a little bit better offensive line going forward, and maybe maybe 2 more, weapons, a true starting off or running back, and then maybe someone like a Quentin Johnston who could catch the ball most of the time. And I think this Chargers team is going to be a force going forward. But this week, I think I'd probably lean Chargers.
Well, that's the first game taken on. This game is a Saturday game. Moving on to the Sunday slate. First game on Sunday, one of the more surprising teams that made the playoffs, in my opinion, the Denver Broncos, taking on the Buffalo Bills, heading to frosty cold Buffalo to take on presumptive MVP Josh Allen. Do you think 8.5 is too many points for the Bills in a playoff game?
I thought a lot about this game and both of these teams in kind of the lead up to these playoffs. And I've been arguing on Twitter with dozens of bots for the last 2 weeks about how Josh Allen is the MVP. I could go into a diatribe about why I think that's the case, but I won't. I'll save you guys the trouble here. I think Josh Allen is the best player in the NFL this year as far as his value to his team. If you look at what he's been able to do with less this year than he had last year, 2 Pro Bowlers on the team, as opposed to maybe the 9 on the Ravens team with who easily could have been the MVP and may still. Obviously, the voting isn't done, but if you look at Vegas, it's Allen. And I only mention Allen to just say, in the playoffs, his individual statistics have been outstanding. Like, he plays really well in the playoffs. Does his team always get it done? No. But he carries the bag when they lose. This Broncos team has more than exceeded their expectations this year. And I'm sure that Sean Payton is going to get votes for Coach of the Year. Bo Nix obviously is going to get votes for Offensive Rookie of the Year. They've played really good. Their defense has been outstanding. Surtain has been amazing, right? But this Sunday, they're playing in Buffalo. And this Sunday, it's going to be cold. It's going to be windy, and it's going to be nasty. And every time this season that I've looked at the weather in games, when I want to bet the Bills, my question is this. Am I going to put my money on the guy who can throw in every condition that you could throw at him, who can run the ball in every condition that you can throw at him, and who can go and win games? And the answer is yes. I think it's going to be Josh Allen. I think he's going to carry his team, and I think that they're going to beat Denver by more than 8.5, obviously, if I've got them to cover. But I just think that this weather is, yeah, they play in Denver. That's fine. But I really think that it's going to be a difference maker here because he's the better quarterback on in both facets, throwing and running the ball. The Bills, I think, also have a statement to make this year. I think that they know that they can go if they play well, they can go and they can win a Super Bowl. I don't think the Broncos have any shot at winning a Super Bowl. And basically for those reasons, I think it's the Bills' time at least at a minimum in this game. So I'm gonna take the Bills.
We talked about in our video for college football playoffs round 1 that I said I'm not going to be taking any underdogs unless I think they have a legit chance to win outright. And I think I kind of have to take that same approach in this game. Denver, while as you said, they've been incredibly impressive. Sean Payton has done a great job in his first year as head coach there. I don't know why we should be surprised. He was a great head coach in New Orleans and a great offensive coordinator for your Cowboys. But I think it's really been Bo Nix that's impressed me the most because I was pretty down on Bo Nix entering the NFL draft. At Auburn, he had a reputation for turning the ball over. Me and my friends, we called him Mo Picks because that was what you got when you were playing Bo Nix, was he would throw more interceptions. He goes over to Oregon and obviously had a great year there, but there were a lot of like flaws and inconsistencies that you could see where it's like, he was throwing a ton of screens, a ton of slants, like the shortest, yards per attempt of like any of the draft eligible quarterbacks. And we know the Oregon scheme is about like getting the ball in space. So like, when you're having a ton of yards after the catch, how much is that really on the quarterback? But he's definitely proven that he is a legit NFL quarterback. I think he's going to have some staying power. I think he's going to be a legitimate starting quarterback for years and years. But, this is his first playoff game. It's going to be the most intense environment that he's been in probably since, he's been in his last Iron Bowl at Bama with Auburn. Maybe Oregon has been in some tougher environments then, but probably not last year. And I just don't see the Denver having the offensive firepower to keep up with the Bills. They have some decent receivers on their team, but, outside of Cortland Sutton, I think it's going to be a stretch to say like Mims or Devon Villay or any of these tight ends are going to like, step up and have like a 75 to 100 yard game. Maybe they'll get some work in the running game, but it feels like Denver's going to really have to depend on their defense to get it done in this game. And even though Patrick Surtain is probably going to win Defensive Player of the Year, I think he was like minus 250 last I saw for that award. He can only do so much as a cornerback, as you said, when Josh Allen is such a beast at running the ball and they're feeding James Cook and they're feeding the backs. Not to mention the Bills don't really have a true number 1 receiver. Yes, they acquired Amari Cooper, but he hasn't been like, the stud they expected him to be. So who's Surtain going to choose to shadow? Probably nobody. He's probably just going to stay on one side of the field and they could easily just target the other side. So it is a lot of points, 8.5 for sure. Over a touchdown, you always got to be a little bit wary, but I don't think Denver's going to win this game. So I do think the Bills get it done. I'm with you on Buffalo. All right, sticking on in the Sunday slate, another rookie quarterback. Bo Nix is probably going to get votes, but not as many as Jaden Daniels will for Rookie of the Year. Washington takes on Tampa Bay. Baker, Daniels, 3-point line for Tampa. Who you got here?
I'm going Commanders, man. This team with Dan Quinn and Jaden Daniels has really, surprised. I mean, I knew that Dan Quinn would be a good coach. He was a great defensive coordinator for the Cowboys. But Jaden Daniels came into this league and he was placed on a team that was last in the division last year. Now they're in the playoffs. Speaking of Coach of the Year votes and speaking of Offensive Rookie of the Year votes, it's likely going to be Jaden Daniels. Probably should be Brock Bowers, but how are you going to give it to a tight end over a quarterback who takes his team to the playoffs and has a season that was statistically near Lamar Jackson's season last year as MVP? So I think they've played outstanding. Their defense has been really, really good against the pass. They've been one of the bottom feeders, though, when it comes to running the ball, something the Bucs have been pretty good at. And rookie Bucky Irvin has showed up and has been outstanding. But coming down to this game, last week the Bucs, all they had to do was win, and they trailed that game. They looked like they were really struggling for the first half. Obviously, they come back and they win the game. They make the playoffs. I just don't feel like the momentum's there. I love Baker Mayfield. What a story with this guy. He's he got just pounded into oblivion by fans, by sports writers in Cleveland. He wasn't an adult, all this stuff. And then he comes to the Bucs, eventually makes his way to the Bucs, and he's taken over this team, man. He's had an outstanding season. He's been a leader. They've won a ton of games. They've won games they weren't supposed to win. And so I do have some confidence in the Bucks, but I think in this spot, I like the Commanders. Like I mentioned, Dan Quinn, the defense, Jaden Daniels is going to be he's going to be around for a long time. He's so dynamic. He makes plays happen with his legs. He makes plays happen, in the air. He's been outstanding, and I think that this is going to be a really good spot for him to shine. So, looking at the public numbers, looking at what I think the score should have been, this kind of fits my little slot here to take the Commanders.
So these two teams played earlier this season. Week 1, Jaden Daniels' first game of the year, first game of his NFL career, and the Bucks kind of smoked them. They won 37-20. That game was at Tampa Bay. This game is also at Tampa Bay. When we were talking about the college football championship games, the college football playoffs for the Ohio State-Oregon game, we've talked about how, when you're in that second matchup of the year or even third, depending on if it's a divisional rival, it's a lot tougher to sweep the board in that type of spot. I do think that does apply here, but my lean is actually going to be Tampa Bay here. Washington has ended the season hot, but so has Tampa Bay. And I think Tampa Bay has ended hot with their defense. You argue that Tampa Bay, barely escaped that game against New Orleans last week, which is 100% true. But Washington also barely escaped against your Cowboys. And they were starting Trey Lance. So, I think in the NFL, it's like, sometimes teams just don't play their best. It is what it is. We can't expect them to play their best every single week. In fact, Tampa also lost to Dallas within the last 5 games, losing by 2 on the road to the Cowboys. I believe that was a primetime game where everybody watching was very impressed by how the Cowboys looked or very disgusted by how Tampa looked. But again, Tampa's defense outside of that game has not allowed more than 20 points in the last 4 games. So their defense, I think, is playing pretty well. They obviously played well enough against Daniels to start the year. Bucky Irving, as their new kind of starting running back, has kind of opened up a new flow to this offense that now isn't so reliant on Baker feeding Mike Evans, feeding Chris Godwin, who's now gone, feeding Otten, who's now gone. So again, the Bucks do have some injuries. I feel like most people are probably going to be on Washington in this game because you have the flashier offense with the quarterback who's, the hot young prospect, and only a 3-point line here kind of implies these two teams are equal minus the home field advantage. But I think the home field advantage is going to come up clutch here. It's very difficult, in my opinion, for a rookie to win in their first playoff game, like with Bo Nix. So I will stick with Tampa here in a spot that I think a lot of people are not going to be on them because Baker's just playing so well. And I think that's really on the strength of their defense that's playing really well right now. I'll ride Tampa.
One point there, as far as the last game of the season. Yeah, both teams have been hot, but the only difference that I would point out is that the Commanders had already locked up a playoff spot, and the Bucks had to win to get in. Right, I guess assuming the Falcons would win their game. So that's to me that's a big difference. So the last week of the season playing the Cowboys, not really a big deal to me, but the Bucks taking it deep with New Orleans in a must-win game says a lot to me. So that's what I would say.
We'll move on to the last game for this video and the last game for the NFL playoffs this round, the Vikings taking on the Rams. And I think that my pick has a lot to do with, last game. Vikings took on the Lions in a must-win game. Whoever win that game was going to be the number 1 overall seed, was going to get the home field advantage throughout the playoffs, was going to get the bye, and whoever lost was going to be in the spot right here as the 5 seed playing on the road in the first round, on the road in the second round, and likely on the road in the third round just to make the playoffs. It was a short line, 2.5, 3. A lot of the public was on the Vikings. I personally was on the Lions, and the Lions just absolutely destroyed the Vikings. Sam Darnold, who has had an absolutely incredible year, looked like the Sam Darnold we all expected him to be, missing a bunch of easy throws, just not playing very well. It was a 31-9 type game. Jahmyr Gibbs was just running all over the field on the Vikings. So I think a lot of people are going to see that and say, you know what, the Vikings are who they thought they were. It was kind of a fraudulent regular season. Sam Darnold's going to come out and be crappy in the playoffs, and it's going to be an easy fade. And yet they come out and they're favorites on the road. I love the Vikings in this spot. I think it's a big bounce back opportunity for them. I think this team is overall pretty good. And yes, they didn't play their best against the Lions, who is one of the best teams in the league. But I think this line is very, very, very telling that they're still making them favorites on the road, knowing that, as I talked about with the Texans, people love to take home dogs in the playoffs. I think people are going to look to fade the Vikings hard after how badly they played. And I think that this is a great spot here to get on the bounce back and take the Vikings on the road. I mean, you could look into some of the more football type reasons, like how the Vikings have been very good at blitzing the quarterback, and the Rams, while they do have Nakua, they do have Cooper Kupp, who has been a complete ghost the last few weeks. They do have Kieran Williams. It feels like their defense is stronger for the Vikings compared to the Rams matchup against the Vikings. You know, who's going to be guarding Justin Jefferson? Who's going to be guarding Jordan Addison? If they do, who's going to be guarding TJ Hawkinson? Vikings have weapons all over the field. I expect Darnold to play a lot better than how he played last week. I will take the Vikings here.
I thought you were going to say Rams, because I was ready to fade you here. I completely agree with everything you said. I'm on the Vikings here last week. Yeah, obviously it was disappointing. I happened to be on the Vikings last week, so I felt a little bit attacked there. But I definitely think the Vikings. I've got them going 2 rounds. I'm holding a couple futures with the Vikings in the Super Bowl. I think that they are a very solid team, and they've proved that this year. They're a very solid defense. Sam Darnold has been very solid, with the exception of last week and maybe one other game, this season. And the numbers prove it, right? I mean, it's easy, you could say, throwing the ball to Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, but he still has to get it done, and he's done it. At the beginning of the season, when JJ went down, everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, the Vikings are in for another year," and then they go and they win 14 games, right? So. I'm on him here. I may be on him big. I mean, maybe it's my ego that's trying to bounce back from last week in that game, but I think they get it done. The Rams, like you mentioned, the Rams have really had to fight this year. Starting, it was, I think, through week, what was it, 7 or 8, they were talking about, should the Rams, should they tank? Should they give up? And
Yeah, weren't they talking
Sean
about trading
McVay,
Stafford? Weren't those the rumors that were out there? Like,
all kinds of stuff. And McVay was like, "Hold my beer, please." McVay being one of the best offensive coordinators in the league, one of the most successful head coaches to this point, who's still coaching, right? You gotta give them their respects here. But O'Connell has been an outstanding coach this year. I think he still leads in the odds for being coach of the year. He's done a lot with his team, and I think they're going to be extra motivated this week after getting embarrassed in their division to get that 1 seed. So, like you said, laying points is as the road team is going to be super interesting, and I think they're going to cover.
I'm actually going to be in Vegas this weekend, so I'll be placing a fairly significant wager on the Vikings and watch the game at the sports book. That is my plan.
All right, yo 11.
Yeah, we'll be rolling the dice big time. But yeah, I'll try to post some videos. Maybe I'll make some mocking content of some of these other sports gambling influencers. That could be some viral clips there. Post on my TikTok and my Twitter if anyone wants to follow me, Snowman _sports on Twitter. You can see my college basketball play of the day. I'm on your Arkansas Razorbacks, by the way, as my college basketball play of the day. So if you're watching this on Wednesday when it comes out, there's an extra free pick for you. Take it on BroThrow.com/YouTube. Sign up absolutely for free. Take all your favorite sports, college football, college basketball, NFL, NBA, MLB, soon around the corner. We're ever closer to spring training. Every sport you want, BroThrow.com/YouTube. Chad, anything else you want to leave the viewers with before we end this one?
Yeah, while we're plugging ourselves, if you get any entertainment out of somebody arguing with Twitter bots over the MVP race or Dak Prescott, whether he's good or not, you can follow me at ChadrickD. That's pretty much my persona online, is arguing with bots. It's better than arguing with my wife, right?
That's for sure. So go ahead, follow ChadrickD, follow Snowman _sports, follow BroThrow on Twitter as well. BroThrow is always doing some giveaways on their Twitter, doing final score predictions for big games or other yards and stuff like that. So you're missing out on the chance to win free money by not following the Twitter. So give us all a follow. Go ahead and do that. And we will see everybody in the next one, hopefully with some big winning slips coming from this video. Peace.